Welcome to Evolving on Purpose with Matt Swartz. This podcast is where real leaders share the inner work behind their breakthroughs and where you'll find the tools and stories to work through whatever is holding you back from who you're meant to be so you can make the impact you're here to make and help change the world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Evolving on Purpose podcast. I am pleased to have Sarah Rollins here as our guest. Sarah Rollins is the founder of Embodied Wellness PLLC, a group therapy practice based in Metro Detroit, here nearby me, and online throughout Michigan, specializing in somatic therapy. The practice specializes in somatic therapy and EMDR to treat trauma, anxiety, and depression. Sarah earned her Master's of Social Work degree from the University of Michigan and is advanced training in somatic experiencing, EMDR, attachment, internal family systems, IFS. She's been featured in podcasts, news articles, and blogs as an expert in somatic therapy, where she shares her knowledge on the connection between the body, complex trauma, and emotional healing. Great to have you here with us today, Sarah.
Great to be here.
Awesome. So we're going to kick off, the first place we start. Tell us about your journey to success. Looking back, what were some of the defining moments and decisions that shaped the path that you're on to get where you're at today?
Such a hard question starting out with. I know that's a simple question, but the journey has not been straightforward as all of our healing and movement journeys. So they always say healing is not linear. Success is not either. So sure. I once heard a podcast about a man who was a professor, and he, instead of giving his resumes of success to his students, he gave his resume of failures, of all the time that he tried something and it didn't work out, or he tried something and he lost money on it, or people rejected it. So what I want to name in my path to success is that there's been a lot of, quote, failures. It has not been smooth sailing. So I think one of the major things is that I've always had kind of a one-track mind towards this field of social work and supporting people. So I know from an early age, I wanted to do psychology, therapy, that kind of stuff. And I never wavered from that. So I think that's been one of my guiding lights, is that I've always been very focused on it. And I just knew that this was what I wanted to do.
Cool. For sure. Yeah. Tell me about the failure resume. Tell me about some of the stumbling blocks that you hit, getting from A to B.
Yeah. So I think in my graduate program, I really struggled to get an internship that prepared me for being in this field. And I think part of that was on me, part of that was on the school. So I really graduated and felt very much unprepared. I had never seen a client individually.
Ooh.
Yeah, I did some groups, but it was really observing. I didn't actually run a group. I never saw a client. So one of the things I did was I purposely sought out a job where I got extra training. And I ended up, there was so many pros to that job, but I ended up not liking the model. It just didn't feel aligned. It was a very behavior-based model where I'm eclectic. I see more than just behavior. I don't think that rewards and consequences or supervision are the only main keys to changing someone's behavior.
Sure.
So I decided to move to another job. And one of the things my boss said to me when I moved from my first to the second job, he said, "Are you leaving this job because you really like this other job? Or are you leaving this job because you feel like you're just so burnt out?" And I remember lying to him and myself and saying, no, I really think this next job is it. But really, he was right. I was so burnt out. And it's not that that's not okay to feel burnt out, but I really didn't try to find a job that felt aligned. I really just needed to get out of the situation I was in. I was working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was on call all the time. So, yeah.
And being on call, I mean, I've seen so many people, right, can absolutely just fry your nervous system. If you're not prepared for on-call work, right? I mean, I can't tell you, I've had countless patients that, end up with panic attacks and end up with, just really bad physical and emotional symptoms because they were so young and they didn't know how to create the boundaries and turn it off. And so that meant that they got, whatever, their pager went off at 2 a.m. and their body's freaking out because they can't deal with it anymore.
Yeah. And I think that was so much of it, but part of it was the program was like, you're supposed to be, like, you're not supposed to set boundaries, because I was working with youth on probation and the goal was for them to stay out of jail. Yeah. So they should call us. And it wasn't intentional that we were on call 24/7, but life happens. Yeah. So I really am so grateful for my friends, because so many times I was in another state on vacation with them or at weddings. And I was like, wait, I gotta answer my call. And so one of the things that's really supported me in my success is my friendships. I have a lot of friends who I've known from an early age. And I also have a lot of friends who are in this field. So they get it on a deeper level, on a different level than some of my other friends who respect what I do, of course, but are like, what the heck? Like, can you just not answer that call? You're on vacation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that over the years you've learned better boundaries. I mean, what does that look like now? You're running a clinic, owning a clinic, doing all of this. I mean, there's problems around the clock. How have you learned to develop those healthy boundaries, or what does that look like in your life right now?
Yeah, I think of boundaries for myself as like kind of a wrestling, I don't know, they call it rink, but I'm not a wrestling fan, but right, like that it can expand. And sometimes I've snapped those boundaries. I have many stories where I went way over my boundaries with a client, and so, or with a situation. So I think sometimes by doing it the wrong way and overstretching myself. And one of the things that I notice for me is that when I overstretch myself too much, I become resentful. Yeah. So, and then that one affects me, but it affects the client therapeutic relationship. So one of the things I've really found beneficial is to, quote, practice what I preach, because now I'm working with people who either some of my clinicians have been in this field longer than me, and some are just starting out or have been in the field for a couple of years. And so what would I tell them to do? And if I'm really not living that, then I don't feel right. It feels like disingenuous. So some of my path towards setting better boundaries, I would not say perfect boundaries, is like in my teaching of others.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not sure where I read it. Maybe it was in your bio, maybe on your website, but I think you said you started 2020. Is that correct? With the practice?
Yeah, with my private practice.
Yeah,
for sure.
The
group practice.
For sure. So tell me about that journey. Like, how did you end up, what was the origin story of your private practice? And tell me, give me the arc. Tell me about the growth.
Yeah. So I never thought of myself in private practice. I remember in graduate school, a lot of people wanted to be in private practice, and it just didn't really interest me. So one of the benefits of my previous jobs was that my clients weren't tied to my income. And so that's something that has been a challenge, both for my clinicians and myself in working in private practice. But I'll get there in a moment. So basically, I started taking a somatic experiencing training through Somatic Experiencing Institute in November of 2019. And I think we all know what happened shortly after that, with the pandemic and everything shutting down. Right. So what happened was I really wanted to practice those skills. I had invested a lot of time and resources and money into this training. And the reason I started doing the SE training was I felt like I was helping the clients I was working with. I worked in addiction. So everybody had a primary diagnosis of a substance use disorder. And most of my clients had a secondary diagnosis of depression, anxiety, PTSD. The list goes on. Yeah. So I felt like once they got sober, both the client and I were like, okay, like we know everything. We know the logic to, I've had trauma or this and this is happening in my life, but how do I really change the way I feel and be better in my life? So I decided through talking to other people, which I will say is one of the best things we can do, is just put our ideas out there and say, hey, do you know of anything? Because that's how I've learned a lot of things in my career, is just talking to other people. So I started the SE training, and it felt like a round peg square hole where I really wanted to practice those skills, but wasn't able to in the setting I was in. So when COVID hit and I was able to do everything virtually, I was like, oh, someone said, maybe you should start a private practice. I was like, okay, I'm going to see 4 people. And my thought process there too was something that I really struggle with is scarcity mindset. And I'm so scared of failing, and I'm so scared of not having enough. So my only goal was to break even. I had invested maybe, $600, $700, $800, right? Yeah. Very little money, for starting a business, not little money, just in general. Sure. And my goal, I was like, if I can just break even. And I started seeing people at like $50, $25. I didn't really set limits. And that was something that I had to work on later, of how do I change that? Because
But that's
right.
where you start, right? I mean,
right.
That's where I started. I was $50 a client,
Yep.
And it was a 50-50 split. So I was making $25 a session, you do what you have to do to build that caseload, right? You just got to start from somewhere.
Exactly. And I was so scared. I had never seen a client who purposely reached out for me. All the clients reached out to the agency, and then I got paired with them. So it felt like higher stakes to me.
For sure.
It felt like more about me. And if they didn't like me, it wasn't like, oh, the agency. It was like, no, you don't like me. And that to me felt so much more vulnerable.
Totally. Yeah. Potential personal rejection rather than some systemic business, whatever, right?
Exactly. So basically, over the next year, I continued to receive a lot of referrals, and I realized how much of a need there was in our Metro Detroit, Michigan area for somatic work. So starting a group practice was honestly a way for me to keep the referrals and not have to refer them out. I was like, wait, I keep referring people out. Like, why don't I just start with somebody? Yeah. And I remember I found someone, she was my first contractor. I'm so grateful for her. And I was like, I can give you 5 clients. I just really didn't want to over commit.
Yeah.
And she ended up being full and like with a full-time caseload. And then I grew from there. Like someone found out, someone knew someone, and she asked if I was hiring. And then I became a little bit more intentional. So I quit my job after a couple years because I was working part-time and running the practice. And then really I looked at the books and I looked at how much I was working in each job. And it kind of felt silly to not switch over based on what I had built up. But it took me years, and there was a lot of anxiety. It was not a easy decision.
Yeah. Because all the while you're saying that in the background is running this tape around some of the scarcity mindset. What if I make the leap and then the referrals stop coming in and then, right? Like I think a lot of us who, are entrepreneurs or who have started something like that, I know, one of my fears is constantly that, what if it just all comes crashing down? It doesn't matter that I have 35 clients a week, what if it all just comes crashing down, right? And it's I think, a very, very common, certainly in our industry, in terms of, because of how referrals work, and it's not necessarily systematic, but also all of the entrepreneurs and leaders I've worked with, I think that's very much a fear, because for a variety of different reasons. But you pointed out, for you, there's a little of the scarcity stuff underneath kind of running that fear for you.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So for your story, you didn't necessarily set out to open a private practice, right? It was, I want to use my somatics. I want to, engage. And then, yeah, you just started like, well, I've got a bunch of these referrals. What do I do with them? And, and here we are. And I think, I find so often I work with a lot of leaders who spend so much time trying to force an outcome. They have an idea in their head, they're trying to force an outcome. And then what they lose is that sort of soft, open, like, we'll see what happens, right? And because I've just seen so many people, so many successful people, there's this like area of their life where they were like, well, we'll give it a try and we'll see what happens. Like, I don't have a huge don't have a huge forcing energy behind that. And then really good things happen. And then they start grabbing a hold of it and then start trying to force it. And then, there's like a, feedback thing. Things start screeching back at them until they hopefully eventually figure out how to kind of loosen a little bit and get back to that place. I don't know if that's ever been part of your experience.
That is exactly what I'm going through right now. So like I said, I really didn't plan any of this. I hired when it felt right to hire, when I had enough referrals to hire, but I didn't have a strategic plan really about anything. And it was interesting because my business was the first place in my life I didn't have that. The rest of my life is very forced. And that's something I don't like about the way I operate. And I have my own therapy around that, but, it just felt so different. And one of the things I realized was, a lot of people like had all these plans, and I did the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I graduated in December. So I don't know, 6-7 months ago.
Yeah.
And they recommended a lot of things. And overall, I'm grateful I did the program, but they were very future focused in creating a plan, which I don't think is problematic, of course. I think we need to kind of, what road are we going down? But I think I got very rigid. And then I started working with someone in the Small Business Association, and he introduced me to like kind of the EOS system. And so I created all these goals, and they weren't really based in anything though. They were just based in like, I should probably make more money next year. I should probably have higher profits. But I just kind of made these numbers, and overall, I like that it's a little bit more purposeful, but it ended up creating, like you said, like a lot more rigidity. I don't think people are as happy. I'm not as happy. So that's honestly what, like right now, I'm trying to, right now, right?
Yeah,
like I'm trying to do is like, screech the brakes, get back to like going with the flow and going with what's right and what comes rather than forcing it.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel good. I think some of my clinicians don't feel good. I don't want to say it all, right?
But it just introduces this, this different energy, right? And it's hard, Sarah, because that's the, we have to be careful, like what business mentors, what coaches, what systems that we look at, right? Because there are, there's absolutely people that live their lives that way. And there's, I'm sure, I think some success there. But the reality of our business, and I think so many service-based sort of entrepreneurial things is there are things that are difficult to systematize. Nobody's saying you can't run ads or you can't like find ways to systematize these things. But again, I think it's always the how, it's not the what, right? It's how am I approaching advertising? How am I approaching, management, right? It's the energy behind the thing. And, because you do the trauma work, we do the trauma work, right? Like certainly what was true for me was understanding how the lack stuff got triggered inside of the structure I was building, right? And having to become aware of that iceberg and go, oh, like this too is an invitation into trauma work. Right? Like I went to this Goldman Sachs training, which is so funny. I was almost in that cohort. I pulled out because we had a baby. So that would have been so funny. I would have met you. But I was I can't do it. We were having a baby and they were very kind about pushing it out and all that.
Well, congrats. But that's so small world, right?
Small world, right? Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I just in, sort of in my entrepreneurial journey and these things. And I saw it so much more when I was running the clinic. And that was part of what made me take a step back, was like, I do not like the person that I've become. I'm trying to like, and as we do, right? Like if we can, identify what's going on in there, and we can use that as an invitation into healing, like, so that's just the next leg of our journey here. Right, Sarah?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to give specifics just to protect people's confidentiality and respect. But, as my clinic has grown bigger, I've had to create more policies and procedures. And I think on the one hand, they can be really helpful in guiding us, right? So, being on your own is like, what do I do in this situation? But I never want my policies or procedures to override someone's clinical discretion and judgment as a therapist ever, right? So the no-show policy from anything. And there's things that I could require from my staff, and not just like notes, right? Of course, everybody's going to require notes. And so there was one thing that really made one of my employees anxious, and I didn't realize, I knew they were anxious about it, but I didn't realize like how impactful it was. And I wish I was more attuned to that, and to like, you don't need to do this. Like, I don't want to make, like, this is so minor, right? Like, I don't want this to be an extra stressor in your life. Like, we have enough going on systemically that like, so those are kind of things that I want to get back to, is just like being attuned, or more attuned to what everybody needs, and not making it a one size fits all. But I notice as we grow bigger, I'm having to navigate that push-pull dynamic.
For sure. Yeah. Our culture lives up here. Right. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I can just predict, right? You go to this program or you do any of these things, and, we're trying to be embodied, right? We're trying to, and then it just pulls us back up here. Right. And then we're in this structure, and we're in this and all that. And then, like you said, the less embodied you are, the less attuned you are. That decreases the attunement with, people. And at some point there are too many people to be fully attuned with. And that's why we have to hire a manager, hire somebody to, but I think the difference, maybe coming from the experiences that we've come from doing the trauma work, it's like, oh, maybe we could get something that other people who haven't done that work can know, which is like, yeah, that attunement is primary. Right? The policies and procedures, absolutely need them. But if we're not connected, or we're not providing somebody that can be attuned and connected, then we're going to end up feeling that sooner or later. And that's going to, matriculate into, burnout, or, turnover, or, negative client, lack of client outcomes, or any of those sorts of things.
Yeah, exactly. So I think as much as I feel terrible, and I, will own, I think I'm pretty good at owning my part, sometimes sadly after I do it. But I think rupture and repair is what we talk about in attachment work, and I try to embody that in how I supervise and how I manage and in my relationships. And so there is rupture. I've created rupture, as everyone has, and I hold myself to high standards to initiate that repair.
For sure. Yeah. And that's, when we're doing like the parenting work, right? Like nobody's a perfect parent. That's not the goal, right? We need to repair, right? We need to be able to acknowledge the rupture, apologize, seek repair, right? I don't think that preventing rupture is helpful to your staff. Right. Because that, again, those conflicts, those challenges, that's an invitation into their growth, into their healing. Right. And if you provide some sort of sanitary environment, which I don't even think is possible, but even if you could, that like, then they're going to get out to the next step of their journey, and they're going to be, you haven't built that immunity. You haven't done that work. So now the next challenge you take on is going to hurt all the more, because you haven't been able to build up your resilience and your ability to navigate those challenges.
Yeah. And I think going back to what we were talking about just a moment ago with boundaries and creating those healthier boundaries, one of the things that's I've learned and learning, right, it's a process, is that people also need to advocate for themselves. So what is on their side of the street and what is on mine? Yeah. Right. And so I tend to take responsibility for other people. Well, they didn't say something, but I should have said it. Or, I mean, just the list goes on. And so, especially in the business world, allowing the companies I work with or the constituents or whoever to like, no, that's on them, right? That they need to clear their side of the street. And I'm only responsible for what's on my side of the street, rather than me just feeling like I need to bulldoze everything. So that's something that, again, I'm continuously working on, but has helped me in my boundary work.
Yeah, for sure. But that sounds like, I mean, I sit with a lot of people. I can tell that that's something you're more clarified on. And I'm curious, like, what has helped you reach that, again, more embodied awareness of like, I'm not going to take all of that on. Has there been specific moments or specific challenges that's really helped you to
I think
that?
Going overboard, right? Like, I can move into, maybe rage is too big of a word, but I can go into that fight response when I feel like there's injustice and when I feel like, I'm not being heard. There was a thing in my elementary school, it was called the debug system, where it was like, if someone was bothering you, there was like a 5-step process. It was ignore, move away, talk friendly, talk firmly, get adult help. And so I feel like I'm pretty good at ignoring, move away, talk friendly. And then sometimes I can talk firmly, but there's no one to go to for help, right? Like there's no boss for me to go to. Like if there's an insurance company issue, I could try to call the insurance commissioner, but I don't really know how successful that's going to be. So I'm kind of get the adult help. And when I feel like I've done all those other steps and I'm still not getting anywhere, I really have a hard time. And then I can go to that fight response. So for me, I don't like that feeling. It's not that I don't think I value the fight response, but I think I go there when it ends up hurting other people. It ends up hurting myself. And so without trying to thwart that response or shame it, I've really learned, and learning, I think is a better word, that how do I channel that energy in a different way? So that's really helped me, because it's like, wait, I'm upset over something they did. And then I end up being like, well, but maybe if I did this, kind of like the bargaining. And so that's also helped me, like, wait, slow down. Like, what is the story I'm telling myself? And when I start to think like, okay, these are the things I did, I can take responsibility for that. But these are the things that I didn't do, and nor should I have done. And what if I can grieve that someone hurt me? Like, what would it be like for me to like pause and say like, I feel gypped, like I feel hurt. I mean, the list goes on. Yeah. So I think sometimes it's like actually sitting with that lack of control.
For sure. Yeah. So can I sit with that lack of control? Can I convert some of the anger into sadness, right? Can I grieve instead of control, right? But that requires me to feel powerless or helpless, and that's not fun. But yeah, that's the pathway through for sure. And for a lot of people who are more used to that control forcing, as your, fight or flight pattern, as your, backup system, for sure.
Yeah. And I think for me, now that I have more staff, I really value their jobs. Like, I don't want to hire someone that I can't support. Yeah. And there's many factors in a therapist being successful, right? I can give them 1 million clients, but if there's not client retention, again. And so that's where I'm trying to focus on, like, what is in my control? What is my responsibility, maybe is a better word, as an employer of a therapist? And what is the responsibility of the therapist? And being more and more clear, because I was so overloading myself that I was becoming burnt out, like I said, resentful. Yeah. And so although I really truly care about my employees and I don't see them as like disposable, I also know that I can't take responsibility. And sometimes my friends and family still have to check me on that. But I know that when they do check me, I can pause and be like, yep, okay, I'm doing it.
Yeah, for sure. And that awareness is key. Yeah. So, Sarah, I appreciate you being so vulnerable about some of these challenges that come with, leading the clinic and boundaries and burnout, and the control thing, which I think, again, a lot of leaders can certainly resonate with. I'm curious about maybe some of the moments where you've had to ask for help, right? You were talking about, oh no, I'm the adult, right? Well, we still need help, right? Talk to me about, whether it's been therapy, coaching, mentorship, like community, how have you been able to ask for help in the midst of your challenges, and how has that shaped your growth?
Asking for help is something that I've struggled with because just before business even came into my life, because I think I can oscillate between not trusting people to help me and feeling overly dependent on others. And that's just some childhood stuff. So that came into my business when I really wanted to do everything on my own. And part of that was because of money, right? I didn't just have oodles amounts of money to hire someone to coach me or do this or that. And I'm grateful I did it on my own in certain ways because it allowed me to know what I was doing. So then when I did hire someone, I could oversee it and be like, wait, that's not the right way to do it versus like just blindly trusting. But the first time I really asked for help was when I hired my first contractor. Now I have employees, but I started with them as contractors, and that was a whole growth journey. But I did a group therapist coaching program because I was like, wait, now I'm like actually not employing someone, but part of their income is like, I'm responsible for that. So I took that very seriously. And the group coaching program actually helped me realize where there were spots I needed to grow, but also that I was doing a lot really well. And so it actually gave me confidence, like, oh, wait, I'm doing some of this stuff. Cool. So I was grateful for that. And overall, I think sometimes I end up asking for help a little too late after maybe that fight response, but I'm working right now actually to kind of create a quote new debug system for myself. So when I notice that urge of like, okay, I'm really frustrated. I have three amazing friends. I have more than three, but three friends that, two are therapists and I can go to about this stuff and they really get it. And so, okay, first I'm going to tell them what I want to say and they would check me. They would say, oops, Sarah, like back up a little bit. Or no, I think that's okay. Before I maybe send that email or, address the person and advocate for myself, because I still want to advocate for myself, but not from, I do a lot of parts work, and what I love is talking for the part, not from the part. Talking for that fight part, not from that fight part where I don't have any agency over it.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, I think our, viewership, we're going to come from two sides. There are going to be people that are super familiar with parts work and people that aren't. And so, the idea that's very central to my work as well is, we're not one thing. We're an emergent system. We have different pieces and parts that are responsible for meeting different needs. They're that part, that control part, that anger part, right? That's there to protect you, that's there to, prevent you from being taken advantage of, right? It has a role and it has a function and it's valid, and we don't want to just shut it down. But how can we make sure it's part of the conversation, right? We're seated at a table, we've got our 5 different parts or whatever, all having a conversation together, instead of allowing that unprocessed emotion to drive, the interaction and then the result. And then we've got another problem because of that. If that situation is built on anger, then, on the other side, there's going to be more of that. So I think sounds like some really important awareness that you've gained through the process.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest gifts of being a therapist is having my integrity aligned. So when I moved into more of a true therapy role rather than I did some like family work. And then I did more school based. And then when I became like an outpatient therapist and I was really teaching people skills and educating and doing, processing, I was like, oh, I gotta check myself. And it's not that I hadn't done my own work, but I think the rubber kind of met the road, and it felt disingenuous for me to say some of the things I was saying without working on my own integration of that. Not that I needed to be, quote, perfect.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree. That's, been one of my greatest gifts, right? I say, if I have whatever, all my appointments in any given week, they all have something to teach me. There's a little fractal of my life, screaming back at me, and I'm giving advice, or I'm supporting them as they're discovering things. And I'm like, yep, okay, that's the one. And so if I'm in a really good place, each therapy session or coaching session that I'm providing, I'm walking away going, so the lesson for me is blank, right? And I think that parallel process is so important, right? So, I think you've answered one of the most important questions, which was like, what is a pattern? What is a pattern that helped you become successful that then becomes counterproductive? And I think that answer is some of this stuff that you're talking about in regards to control and anger and, any of that, right? Mm-hmm. It protected you at some point, right, from being hurt or being taken advantage of. And you're really trying to figure out how to, what place that's going to have and how to deal with that successfully. Because the very thing that can help us be very successful can become super detrimental later.
Yeah. And as I talk to my clients about this too, right, I'm really trying not to shame myself over it. One of the things I've seen my own growth in is when some of this stuff has come up lately, I don't think I'm a bad person, which is so different. Like I feel guilty. And I think for me, like in this situation, guilt is appropriate. And I've owned up to the things that I've felt guilty about, and that has felt good. But I haven't had the dialogue of like, oh my God, I'm a bad person. And I think for me, that shows a lot of my growth, that I'm not defining myself by one part, right? Yeah. And yeah, I can still take responsibility, because I know when I'm in a shame spiral, like I'm not doing well. So I'm not taking responsibility. I'm blaming other people. I'm not motivated. I mean, the list goes on. So, for sure. I'm proud of myself for that, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, you've been talking about a part that you're currently working on, but what I hear you saying is that some of the shame and guilt stuff has been something that you've been able to work on pretty successfully. And it sounds like more compassion, less shame. What's been, kind of helpful in that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. One of the earliest lessons I've learned as a therapist is no one gets better hating themselves or shaming themselves. Like I've seen it so many times of like, tough love. If I don't hold myself accountable, and it's like, I don't think you're holding yourself accountable. I think you're shaming yourself. And I think those are really two different things, but can feel the same. How would
you separate that if you were trying to explain that to somebody? What's the difference between shaming yourself and holding yourself accountable?
I think it goes to, I've done something that's not aligned with who I want to be, is holding myself accountable. And how do I move towards alignment of who I want to be? Versus shaming myself is I'm a bad person. And when I'm a bad person, like that's the end. Like there's no moving up from that, because if fundamentally I'm a bad person, how can I ever improve?
Yeah. So what does that, just a little taste of that process look like? So instead of going the I'm a bad person route, I'm going, okay, I'm going to, take accountability. I'm going to see this thing isn't within my values. Where do you go from there?
Yeah. And then how do I make repair? Like, what does that look like? So, I've actually learned a lot when I was working in addiction work with the 12 steps, because they talk about one of the steps, I'm blanking on which one it is making amends. And one of the things that I like is that it's not always going to the other person and apologizing, because sometimes that actually hurts that other person more. And it just makes you feel like you've gotten it off your chest, but actually hurts them more. And then you're creating another rupture. So there's many ways to make repair. One could be, I love that they call it like a living amends. Like part of my journey is that I'm going to intentionally not make this decision again. And that not just like, oh, I apologize. And then that's it. But it's like, let's say, I don't know, you stole something, right? It's like my living amends is to not take from other people, right? And making that part of your intention. Yeah. And I think that's where parts work comes in for me so much is like, if I can truly see this as a part and not self or my whole, it just, for me, really helps to not shame myself.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love the idea of living amends. And so this is a good transition to our couple of final questions as we close down, Sarah. And this has been so awesome. I appreciate your, again, this is what I'm looking for from these discussions. Hey, these issues I've had with boundaries, these issues I've had with control, like so many leaders are going to resonate with these things. These issues I've had with self-blame, like who hasn't experienced all of these things, right? And this is different than, what's my operational procedure for, blah, 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 right? So one of the final questions. So you're talking about being intentional, right? What does living on purpose mean to you right now in your life? Not as an idea, but as like the reality of your day to day. How does that show up?
Mm-hmm. I just had a conversation about this yesterday. So I love, like you said, how things always come together when you need them to. And I think this is so cliche. So sometimes I have a problem with saying cliche stuff, but for me, it's resonating with that pushing, with that control, and how I'm really just searching for the destination, but I end up like, again, missing the journey, right? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And actually, my therapist said to me yesterday, 50% of our enjoyment of a vacation is the anticipation of it, right? And I was like, so like there's science, like there's truth behind the journey. And in my relationship right now, he is very good at focusing on the journey, and that is not one of my fortes, but hearing his perspective, and slowing down enough to be like, wait, I want to be on that journey with him. Like, I don't want to miss out. Because there's a relational aspect, and I know actually we heal in relationship, and that has been a whole nother journey for me. So we could talk about that forever, but I think that's really kind of hitting a chord with me. And I think about the intentionality, slowing down, attunement is if I'm so focused on the outcome, I'm not going to be attuned to what's happening to quote, get to the outcome. Yeah. And that's actually what I talk about with somatic work all the time. Cause I'll say to someone like, would you be interested in trying a somatic exercise? And the goal is not to get to the exercise.
Yeah. The somatics is an experience, right?
Yes.
What's happening? What's this doing? Why am I, no, just be in it. Just let your body, like your body has the wisdom, let it do the work, Mm-hmm. It's very much a journey. Yeah. So it's cliche for a reason, right? It's cliche because it's important. So, focusing on that journey, and then, you're saying the connection and relationality on the way, right? The attunement. So wrapping up, one final question. If your life and work ultimately succeeded beyond what you had imagined, what do you hope changes in the world because you were here?
I think ultimately that people who came into my life or I came into theirs, felt 1% better. Like that I left things just a little bit better, right? I think about if you walk into a space and there, I don't know, a bathroom and there's trash on the floor. It's let's just pick up the trash, right? That it can be a little bit better. Knowing that there's so much going on, I can't solve all these systemic issues. And I think that desire of mine, kind of working on aligning that with how do I advocate for myself, not have this really overactivated fight response, because those kind of clash for me.
Yeah, I love that. 1% better sounds amazing. Yeah. Well, awesome, Sarah. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate all of your vulnerability and the exploration of some of the highs and lows along your journey. And I'm glad that you're out there leading a clinic, helping other people to heal and helping other people to help other people to heal. For me, that's how it all happens, is little by little, each of us doing a little better. So I love that so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if this episode resonated with you and you're doing this kind of inner work in your own life, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening, so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you know someone else who's on this path, share this podcast with them. This work wasn't meant to be done alone, and that's why we're building this community together. So let's keep the conversation going. You can also follow along on Instagram for more reflections, tools, and conversations between episodes, and let us know what you want us to explore next. At the end of the day, this is about more than just a podcast. This is a movement. It's about a group of people that are choosing to grow, to heal, and to step into the lives they're meant to live, so that we can make the impact we're here to make, the kind of impact the world actually needs. Thanks for being here. And as always, let's keep evolving on purpose together.